It's a common idea, you hear it all the time. Humans have conquered nature. We have medicine, heat, air conditioning, and food delivery. We don't have to outrun a lion to survive. We don't have to fight for every scrap of food. So the thinking goes, we must have stopped evolving. Natural selection, that brutal engine of change, has been switched off. We've reached the end of the line. But that's not true. Not at all. We are still evolving. In fact, we might be evolving faster than ever before. The rules of the game have changed, for sure. The pressures are different, but the process of evolution is still running, humming along in the background of our lives, inside our very cells. To understand why, we have to clear up what evolution actually is. It's not about getting better or stronger or smarter in some cosmic sense. It's not a ladder we're climbing towards some perfect form. Evolution is just change over time. More specifically, it's a change in the frequency of genes in a population over generations. That's it. If a certain genetic trait becomes more common, that's evolution. If another trait becomes rarer, that's also evolution. The process doesn't have a goal. It just responds to conditions. And the conditions for humans have been changing dramatically. The old picture of evolution is simple. An animal is born with a random mutation. Maybe it's a slightly thicker coat of fur. A harsh winter comes along and most of its siblings freeze. But the one with the thicker fur survives. It grows up, has babies, and passes on its thick fur gene. Over many generations, the whole species has thicker fur. That's natural selection in a nutshell. Survival of the fittest. And for most of human history, it worked just like that. We lived in small groups, we were at the mercy of the climate, predators, and starvation. A mutation that made someone a little faster, a little better at digesting tough plants, or a little more resistant to a local parasite could mean the difference between life and death. Those who survived passed on their genes. Those who didn't. It was a slow, brutal process of adaptation to the physical environment. Then something happened. We started to control our environment. The big turning point was about 10,000 years ago. We invented agriculture. This was a massive change. We no longer had to wander around hunting and gathering. We could settle down. We could grow our own food. This created food surpluses, which allowed for larger populations, villages, and eventually cities. It was the beginning of civilization as we know it, and this is where people think the story of evolution ends. With a steady food supply, we insulated ourselves from the raw power of nature. Then came sanitation, which reduced disease. Then came modern medicine, which could save people who would have died just a century ago. A child born with a weak immune system can now live a full life. A person with poor eyesight can get glasses. It seems like we've created a safety net that catches everyone, removing the selective pressures that once drove revolution. This view makes sense on the surface, but it misses the bigger picture. We didn't stop evolution. We just changed the selective pressures. We swapped one set of challenges for another. Our own culture, our own inventions became the new environment that we have to adapt to. Our genes are still responding to the world we've built. Let's look at the most famous example of recent human evolution. It's something you probably have in your fridge. Milk. For most mammals, the ability to digest lactose, the sugar in milk, switches off after infancy. It makes sense. Once you're weaned, you don't need milk anymore, so why waste energy producing the enzyme lactase? That breaks it down. For most of human history, all adults were lactose intolerant, but then some human populations started domesticating cattle, goats, and sheep. They had a new rich source of food right on their doorstep. But there was a problem. The adults couldn't digest the milk without getting sick. Then, a random mutation appeared in some people. This mutation kept the lactase gene switched on into adulthood. Suddenly, these people had a massive advantage. They had a reliable source of calories, fat, and protein that their neighbors couldn't stomach. In times of famine, when crops failed, those who could drink milk were more likely to survive. They were healthier, they had more children, and they passed that lactase persistence gene on to their kids. Over thousands of years, this trait became incredibly common in populations that practiced dairy farming, like in Europe and parts of Africa and the Middle East. But in places where dairy farming was not a part of the culture, like much of Asia and the Americas, most people are still lactose intolerant today. This isn't ancient history. This evolutionary event happened within the last 10,000 years, a blink of an eye in evolutionary time. It's a perfect example of how our culture, in this case the practice of dairy farming, created a powerful new selective pressure that reshaped our DNA. We didn't just domesticate cows. In a way, cows domesticated us, and it's not just milk. Our diet has been a huge driver of recent evolution. When we started farming, our diets shifted dramatically. We began eating a lot more starch from grains like wheat, rice, and corn. Starch is a complex carbohydrate that needs to be broken down by an enzyme called amylase, which is in our saliva. It turns out that different populations have different numbers of copies of the gene for salivary amylase, AMY1. People from cultures with historically high starch diets, like Europeans and Asians, tend to have many copies of this gene. More copies mean more amylase in your saliva, which means you can break down starch more efficiently and get more energy from your food. In contrast, people from cultures that historically relied on hunting, fishing, or low-starch agriculture tend to have fewer copies. Again, our diet, a product of our culture, has directly sculpted our genes. We adapted to eat the food we invented. Disease is another major force that hasn't gone away. We have antibiotics and vaccines, but for most of our history, infectious diseases were a primary cause of death. They were a relentless selective pressure. A single epidemic could wipe out a huge portion of a population, leaving behind only those who had some natural resistance. We can see the genetic scars of these old battles today. Take sickle-cell anemia. It's a genetic blood disorder that can be very serious, but carrying one copy of the sickle cell gene provides significant protection against malaria. In parts of the world where malaria is, or was, common, like West Africa, the sickle cell gene is also common. The evolutionary trade-off was clear. The risk of sickle cell disease was outweighed by the massive survival advantage of malaria resistance. This is natural selection in action, a balancing act between a deadly parasite and a dangerous gene. A more recent example involves HIV. Scientists discovered that some people are highly resistant to HIV infection. It turns out they have a mutation in a gene called CCR5. This mutation, known as CCR5 delta 32, changes a protein on the surface of their immune cells, making it impossible for the virus to get in. This mutation is most common in people of Northern European descent. Why? Scientists think that this mutation might have provided resistance to some other major epidemic that swept through Europe in the past, maybe the bubonic plague or smallpox. Those who had the mutation survived and passed it on. Now, by pure chance, it provides a defense against a very modern virus. The evolutionary battle against pathogens is ongoing. As new diseases emerge, our gene pool will continue to respond. Gene evolution isn't always about life and death either. Sometimes it's about adapting to a specific environment in a less dramatic way. Think about people who live at high altitudes, like in the Himalayas or the Andes. The air there is thin. There's much less oxygen. For most of us, going to such a high altitude leaves us breathless and sick. But people whose ancestors have lived there for thousands of years have adapted. What's fascinating is that they've adapted in different ways. Tibetans, for example, have genetic changes that allow them to breathe more rapidly and have blood vessels that are wider, allowing for better blood flow. They essentially make more efficient use of the little oxygen they get. Andeans, on the other hand, have a different solution. Their blood contains higher concentrations of hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen. Two different populations faced with the same environmental challenge evolved two different genetic solutions. This shows that evolution isn't a single path. It's a branching tree of possibilities, constantly exploring new ways to solve problems. And what about visible traits? Things like skin color, hair color, and eye color. These are also products of evolution. Skin color is a classic example of adaptation to geography. This darker skin is rich in melanin, which protects against the harmful effects of strong UV radiation in sunny climates near the equator. Lighter skin evolved in populations that moved to cloudier northern latitudes. There, the problem wasn't too much sun, but too little. The body needs some UV radiation to produce vitamin D, which is essential for bone health. Lighter skin absorbs UV more efficiently, which was a big advantage in places with long, dark winters. Even something like blue eyes is a product of recent evolution. All blue-eyed people share a single common ancestor who lived somewhere around the Black Sea between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago. This ancestor had a mutation in a gene that essentially switched off the production of brown pigment in the iris. The trait has no major survival advantage. So why did it spread? One theory is sexual selection. In a population of brown-eyed people, someone with striking blue eyes might have been seen as novel and attractive. They might have had more partners and more children, causing the gene to spread rapidly. This shows that evolution isn't just driven by survival, it's also driven by reproduction. Who gets to have kids is just as important as who survives to adulthood. So we have clear evidence that we've been evolving right up to the present day. But what about now? In our modern, globalized, technological world, are the pressures finally gone? No, they've just changed again. Think about our modern lifestyle. For most of human history, we were active. We walked everywhere. Food was often scarce. Our bodies evolved for that reality. Our metabolism is designed to store fat efficiently, to save up energy for lean times. Now, for many of us, life is sedentary. We sit at desks, we drive cars, and food, especially high-calorie processed food, is everywhere. That old genetic programming to store fat, which was once a lifesaver, is now a liability. It contributes to obesity, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. These conditions affect survival and reproduction. It's entirely possible that over many, many generations, there will be a selection for genes that help us better process sugars and fats, or that protect us from the negative effects of a sedentary lifestyle. We've created a new environment off the office chair and the fast food restaurant, and our genes will eventually have to reckon with it. Medicine itself is a new kind of selective pressure. It's not stopping evolution, it's redirecting it. Take C-sections. For centuries, a woman's pelvic width was under strong selective pressure. If a woman's pelvis was too narrow to deliver a baby, both she and the baby would often die. This meant there was strong selection for wider hips. But now, with C-sections, a woman with a narrow pelvis can have healthy children. This has relaxed the selection pressure. Some scientists have noted a small but measurable trend towards narrower pelvises and larger babies' heads. We are using technology to bypass an old evolutionary constraint, and that is changing the course of our evolution. Similarly, genetic diseases that were once a death sentence no longer are. Someone with type 1 diabetes can live a long life with insulin. People with cystic fibrosis are living longer and having children. This is a wonderful thing, a triumph of human ingenuity and compassion. From an evolutionary perspective, it means that genes that were once aggressively selected against are now remaining in the gene pool. This isn't good or bad, it's just a change. We are altering the genetic makeup of future generations through our medical choices. We have taken the wheel of our own evolution in a way that no species has before. Another huge factor in modern human evolution is globalization. For most of our history, human populations were relatively isolated. A person in a small village in China was very unlikely to have a child with someone from a village in the Andes. This isolation allowed for distinct genetic traits to develop in different parts of the world. But now, we live in a connected world. People move, travel, and have families with people from completely different backgrounds. This is called gene flow, and it's happening on a scale never before seen in human history. It's like a massive genetic mixing event. Traits that were once confined to one population are now spreading all over the world. This process tends to make the human population as a whole more genetically similar. Regional differences are blurring. At the same time, this mixing can create new combinations of genes that have never existed before. This genetic shuffling increases our overall diversity, which can be a good thing. A more diverse gene pool might give our species more tools to deal with future challenges like new diseases. So, where is this all going? What does the future of human evolution look like? It's impossible to say for sure. Evolution doesn't plan ahead, but we can make some educated guesses based on the forces at play today. It's unlikely we will evolve into big-headed, gray-skinned aliens like in science fiction. Evolution doesn't work that way. It tinkers. It makes small adjustments, not giant leaps. And many of the changes will be invisible, happening in the chemistry of our cells. We might see continued adaptation to diet. Perhaps we'll see changes in our immune systems as we face new pathogens or live in increasingly sterile environments. Some scientists have even suggested that with the increasing use of screens, there might be selection for eyes that can better handle close-up focus for long periods. One of the biggest questions is about our brains. Are we still getting smarter? It's a tricky question. For a long time, having a bigger brain was a clear advantage. It allowed us to create tools, language, and culture, but there's a trade-off. Big brains require a huge amount of energy, and big heads make childbirth dangerous. It's possible we've reached a kind of equilibrium, where the benefits of a bigger brain are balanced by the costs. Instead of getting bigger, our brains might be changing in more subtle ways. The pressures are different now. In a complex, interconnected society, maybe traits like cooperation, communication, and the ability to process vast amounts of information are more important for success in reproduction than raw problem solving. But this is very hard to measure. The link between genes and complex behaviors is incredibly complicated. And then there's the wildcard genetic engineering. With technologies like CRISPR, we are gaining the ability to directly edit our own DNA. We could, in theory, eliminate genetic diseases. We could enhance certain traits. This takes us into a whole new realm. If we start directing our own evolution, we are no longer just subject to natural or cultural selection. We become the selectors. This raises huge ethical questions. Who decides what changes to make? What are the unintended consequences? Do we risk creating a genetic divide between the enhanced and the unenhanced? This is a conversation we are just beginning to have as a species. The decisions we make in the coming decades could shape the future of humanity in a profound way. But even without direct genetic engineering, our evolution continues. It's a slow process. We won't notice it in our own lifetimes, or even over a few centuries. But the changes are accumulating. The story of human evolution is not finished. We didn't reach some final, perfect form and then stop. That's not how it works. To think we stopped evolving is to misunderstand our place in nature. It's a kind of arrogance. It assumes we are separate from the biological processes that govern every other living thing on this planet. We are not. We are a product of evolution, and we are still subject to its laws. We've built a complex technological world, but that world is now the very environment that is shaping us. The selective pressures have changed from can you outrun a predator to can your body handle processed sugar, or is your immune system prepared for a novel virus that can cross the globe in 24 hours? The process is more complex now. It's a dance between our genes, our culture, our technology, and the environment. We are no longer just adapting to mountains and ice ages, we are adapting to cities, to diets, to medicine, and to ourselves. Evolution is not a story of the past, it's a story of the present, and we are all living it. The changes are happening right now, and the subtle shifts of gene frequencies from one generation to the next, all around the world. The human story is not over. We are in the middle of a very interesting chapter. And the next page has not yet been written.